All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I am Alexandra Lecoeur. I'm the director of the European Cultural Academy in Venice. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to this session, which is about one of our most impactful programs. Here, I want to give you a little overview of the webinar and what is going to happen. I'm going to give a short introduction, and then Dr. Howard going to give a presentation and outline of the course, and then Dr. Mathew, he's going to follow up with some slides and more details about the content of the program. So this webinar, it precedes a 10-day program that we organize in Venice. It is called Sustainable Healthy Cities Building for the Future. At a time when our cities are challenged by climate, social disconnect, mass tourism in case of Venice, this course really asks, what does a healthy, future-ready city actually look like? And it's a 10-day webinar with an amazing list of experts and lecturers. And this program brings together architecture, design, policy, and it's for those who want to reshape cities so they don't just, function, but actually support human and, Earth, our planetary well-being. We look at mobility, we look at infrastructure, urban equity, climate responsiveness, and we're doing it through workshops and also site visits and working on a real site in Venice. Here I wanted to share, so this program is already run for the fourth time. Can you imagine? The fourth time already. It's always very successful, and I found some photos from our WhatsApp group from the previous edition, 2024. So we just to give you a feel of what kind of energy, what kind of vibe we have in Venice. These are the participants of the last year cohort on their trips to Venice in the restaurants. This is your classroom, Palazzo Bembo. The course takes place in Palazzo Bembo, which is right in the heart of the city, very close to Rialto Bridge. And you see that the second floor, that's where Academy is, and you see your future classroom on those photos. I've also prepared some course statistics for you to understand if this is course for you or not. So we have a very high satisfaction score. We do get a little bit more in that particular course, more ladies than men. More, so there are 60% female, 40% male students in that course. It's usually a very international group, so a mix of different nationalities. People are coming from all over the world. The last year we had a cohort, from Canada, US, and Philippines, and China, UK, Brazil, all people from all over Europe. And we tend to get 30% professionals, meaning urban planners, designers, architects, engineers, 30% students, researchers, so PhD researchers, and then 10% of people who are just very interested in the topic covered by that course, and they could be creatives, photographers. I do believe we even had a lawyer at a certain moment. So you don't need technical skills to join that course. It's structured in a way that you will feel that you can get that material, you can understand the material, no matter if whatever you studied. So in general, this course is ideal for architects, urbanists, engineers, policymakers, and anyone working at the intersection of the cities and sustainability. It runs in Venice from June 23 to July 4th. So it includes lectures, collaborative studio sessions, visits, and full access to the Venice Biennale. And I'll talk about the Biennale in a moment. And for why Venice? Venice is not just a backdrop, it's really a classroom for the participants of this course. It's a city facing urgent sustainability challenges, questions, but it also has been experimenting with various solutions for very long time, for centuries. And of course, it's a very special time to be in Venice because this year, from May to November, we have the biggest and the oldest architecture exhibition in the world taking place in the city, and it's called the Venice Architecture Biennale. This is the 19th edition of the show, and it is curated by Carlo Ratti, an Italian architect, researcher, curator, who is now working at MIT in the US. And he named the exhibition Intelligence, Natural, Artificial, and Collective. So for you guys, I've tried to sum up his curatorial statement and what we're gonna see during the Architecture Biennale in Venice. There are gonna be 66 countries participating, so each country thinks of the most interesting, relevant projects that are happening in that country, and then they come to Venice to present it to the public. So the key vision for Carlo Ratti is that architecture must go beyond mitigation and embrace adaptation to climate realities. He mentions that last year, 2024, was the Earth's hottest year, so we really need to take urgent action. Intelligence explores how natural, artificial, and collective they come together. So that's going to be a very interesting topic, of course, with artificial intelligence playing a bigger role in in every aspect of our lives. And of course, how do people can embrace it, or how can they use it to create healthier, more sustainable cities and environment. And of course, architecture must become flexible and interdisciplinary. And in general, architecture exhibitions are usually about big ideas, future ideas, new materials, and much less about white cube models. So it's really a very interesting show, and we are very lucky that this year we could be a part of that show. Okay, so before I give floor to David and Matthew, I would like to invite you to join the course. So I do hope to see you in Venice. We have already accepted 16 people, and spots are quite limited. You need to apply, and then your application would be reviewed. So I encourage you, if you're thinking of joining, please apply early. At the end of the webinar, I'm also gonna share a special offering as a little thank you for you guys attending this webinar. All right, and now I would love to introduce the studio leaders who bring this program to life with their vision, with their expertise, and they're also a lot of fun to be around. So, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks all for joining us today. So my name's David. I'm an associate professor at University of Oxford, and I've been involved with the Sustainable Urban Development Programme for the last 15 years. And I've worked actually closely with Mathew and the King's Foundation during those years. So this summer studio, in some ways, is a culmination of over a decade working together, delivering a master's and a PhD programme in sustainable urban development. And the summer school is in some ways a microcosm of what we've learned and taught over the last 15 years. And Alexandra pointed out the type of students or participants on the program, and they reflect much of the programs we've run in Oxford, a whole range of experience, expertise, different nationalities. And in these days, many people have been born in one country, educated in another, and work in another. So it's always a very rich mix. And once again, you don't really understand, well, I didn't understand when I first started teaching sort of these summer schools, etc., how much is gained from people being in the same room for 10 days. And that type of dialogue and discussion and professional and friendship networks do last. And also being part of the program, you'll very much become an alumni, and we're very keen to continue working with and following up with any participant on the program. And I think in several cases, participants have visited Mathew in London, at the King's Foundation, and myself in Oxford. So we're very keen to make sure your experience lasts beyond those 10 days and you gain as much as you can from it. Matthew's going to go in more detail about the components of the course, particularly in Venice. And Alexandra also points out the very interesting rationale for having a course in Venice, which is probably among the most vulnerable cities, I guess, facing climate change, climate crisis, a whole range of economic, political, and environmental issues. So the main sort of focus, if you will, of the 10 days of the program is on I'd say healthy urbanism. So yes, sustainable urbanism, but increasingly we frame our discussions and our case studies around healthy urbanism. So healthy urbanism obviously responds to healthy cities, to the cities themselves and also the people living there. But we look at a whole range of aspects of health. So yes, it might be human health, medical health, etc., environmental health, but we also look at the social aspects of health, healthy societies, economic health, but also civic health in the way that a city might be governed. And Venice itself provides a very interesting dynamic between the major political players, the Biennale, the council, the universities. So there's a lot of context there to really look at an interesting microcosm of many of the global issues that you individually and we collectively are facing. So the backdrop is one of healthy urbanism, and we try to link these global themes down through to local impact or context of Venice, but also you'll get to know a lot about Venice itself, and I think that's quite interesting. And you'll notice that being there for 10 days, your immersion or your understanding of Venice is immensely different from maybe those of you been here before for 1 or 2 days or just the 12 hours, etc. And the various Venices, you'll find very different Venice in the evening as opposed to the early morning, as opposed to the afternoon, etc. And over the course of 10 days, you really explore a large part of the Venetian region. We'll go out to the islands and we'll look at various perspectives. We'll take in different cultural, political views of our speakers, look at the positives of the Biennale and also look at some of the critiques of the Biennale, and really take I'd say, a fully encompassing idea or perspective of what Venice challenges Venice faces today and in the future. And part of that is by looking at how Venice was created and emerged historically. So really, I find it fascinating. I do actually find it fascinating, and we enjoy the course, which is always great. So I think if your sort of co-educators are enjoying themselves, I think that often gives a good basis for the whole course as a whole. As Alexander said, it's been running for 4 years now. It was first established, if you will, in 2019, then COVID intervened, and then we were delighted to be able to actually run the course in person as of 4 years ago. I think one of the key aspects to take from the broader aspects, so I'm a co-director of the Global Centre on Healthcare and Urbanisation in Oxford, and that works closely with the King's Foundation as well. But some of the key aspects we look there is evidence-based research and mixing current best practices with current evidence. And you'll find that during the week, we want to have people's opinions, but we also want to have creative and critical analysis of ideas. And that comes through very much, and Mathew would talk a bit more about this. During the week, we'll ask you to work individually or in small groups to produce a sort of master plan, a new vision for an area of Venice. And this is quite an interesting task, because you'll all be doing it effectively together, collectively, but doing it either in a small group or individually. And for those who want to see what previous participants on the program have done, for those who wish, they can publish their their project as a blog on the Global Central Healthcare and Urbanization website, the GCHU website. And if you go to blogs, you'll see that over the last few years, some of the work that students have done over the 10 days is published there. And that's quite a useful takeaway, because if you're going for work jobs or just want to say, hey, what did I do in the 10 days of Venice? It's always good to have an output. So quite a few students have been glad to have the sort of output of their week's work published via University of Oxford website. I think that's probably said enough. I know Matthew's got some more details, but I think one key thing also is for you to ask us any questions about the programme. And I will now pass on to Dr. Mathew Hardy, who is sitting in a library in London, it looks like.
Yep. Greetings, everyone, from the King's Foundation in London. And I'm just about to share my slides and talk to you a little bit in more detail about the summer school. And I hope you can all hear me. I was going to say, we've called this summer school Learning from the Past, Building for the Future, because that's one of the things that we believe in here at the King's Foundation in London, is that we have this incredible inheritance of buildings from the past, and we really need to use those as a learning area for thinking about what we do in the future. And the past provides so many opportunities for us to think about what the future might hold, and to look at things that have been tried and failed. I would argue that traditional architecture contains within it a sort of record of success and failure, which we can very much, as architects, as members of the public, as members of society, learn from and understand when we think about sustainability in the future. But today I wanted to and David and Alexandra have talked about the nature of the summer school. I wanted to give you, if you like, a sort of teaser of what we talk about in the course, and this will be just really perhaps to whet your appetite or to get you thinking about what we might cover. So, what is Venice, and what do we mean when you talk about Venice? I think, we all know this image. This is actually produced by Midjourney. If you ask AI what Venice is, you get a reasonably sort of meaningful kind of image of what Venice might be. I think surprisingly, unsurprisingly, incorporating nearly photorealistic images of Venice, it gives you an idea that there are so many photos of Venice out there, and so many accounts of Venice, and so many historical views of it, that it's pretty easy to form in your mind's eye what Venice is like. But as David had said, the real advantage of this course, and I think what you might get out of it, is a deeper understanding of Venice. Now, when we started offering this program, as David had said, I had been to Venice 45 years ago, and again, I think more recently than that, and spent maybe, I think on one case, a day in Venice, like so many people do, sometimes 3 days perhaps, or some sort of event, or run a conference there in 2006 and got to know it a little bit better. But I think by the time you've spent 10 or 12 days in Venice, you really start to understand it so much better as a city. So for so many people who visit Venice for a day or less, and this is a real problem with Venetian tourism, is that people arrive bringing a packed lunch, leaving only rubbish, don't spend much money, and see really very little of the city and what's left of its life. I think it's more than you might imagine actually left of its authentic existence. So many people see Piazza San Marco and imagine that's Venice to them, or the Rialto Bridge, the two sort of key iconic image generating things of Venice. And if you look at, if you put in Venice into a search engine, you'll get 1 million images of both, probably 100 million images of both. But what is Venice? Is it just these islands in the lagoon with the Grand Canal as a reversed S bend through the middle. As we all know, described sort of as is Venice a fish in the famous account. But I think as we zoom out, we see actually a Venice which is much bigger and encompasses, as David has said, all of these islands and the lagoon, Mestre on the far side, the big modern industrial port, which has brought with it economic vitality to the lagoon and the region, and also all sorts of problems of pollution and affecting the tidal nature of the lagoon and the swamp environment. Zoom out a bit more, you see actually Venice's lagoon is really much bigger than the city itself, and around 1 million people live in the modern Venice, which consists of Mestre and its airport just to the north of the islands there, and Lido and the various cities around it. This is actually a conurbation in a modern sense, and a very large one, and one in which the central focus of it, if you like, is actually in some sort of eternal state of decline and depopulation. And people talk about Venice as being a conurbation with an empty centre. So zooming out a bit more, we see perhaps the historical extent of the Venetian sphere of influence, extending down to Croatia on the right, up to the foothills of the Alps in the north, from which so much of the materials to build the city were sourced. The larch piles on which the city sits come from the foothills of the Alps. So this was a city which already 700-800 years ago had a big, peaceful hinterland in which to trade. It was connected to its hinterland by a series of canals, as we see in this diagram from the mid-16th century. They already considered, flooding and transport and all of these things which are such challenges for the future were already well established as ways of controlling, or if you like, or exploiting, or facilitating, its inland empire. And I think if we go out further, we see a Venice which is historically the kind of axis of Renaissance, of the medieval and Renaissance link between the eastern parts of the Mediterranean and the western parts of the Mediterranean, which had a very large sphere of influence and trade right across the Mediterranean into the Near East, into North Africa, through Egypt, and right round through the Bosphorus to Constantinople, as it was, and so on. So this was a big and important empire historically. But I think, often, again, in our mental image of Venice, we see in the media, the contemporary media, an ongoing series of disasters, people falling in the water out of gondolas, a city which is utterly swamped with tourists, apparently. Although, as David says, there's a completely different Venice in the evening, because so many of the visitors to Venice actually leave around 5 o'clock. If you wait a bit and go out a bit later in the evening, you'll have the city practically to yourself once you get off the main artery between the railway station and Piazza San Marco. And that's really a real something that I've really enjoyed in the last 3 iterations of the program is getting to know the city after dark when people come out. And so it's the first city in the world that I think has introduced an entry ticket for day visitors, and that's an attempt to get something back from people who, as I described, maybe only visit for 8 hours and bring their own lunch and don't spend any money, but use infrastructure in the city. This, of course, doesn't apply to those who are staying in the city during the course. So if you are here doing the program, you simply fill out an online exemption and carry it around in your pocket in case you're asked who you are by tourist police. Never happened to me yet, but just as well worth knowing anyway, that you won't have to pay the entry tax. And so I think we're all familiar with the images of Acqua Alta, of the high water, the flooding in Italy, in Venice, sorry, most recently and disastrously in 2019, leading to these terrible scenes of sort of devastation and an endless series of ongoing problems. So it's sometimes possible to see Venice as a sort of dying city, and I think it's fair to say that it's been seen as a dying city in some senses for 225 years now, and it still seems to be going. People still want to visit it. It still has an authentic life of its own, and this makes it such an interesting, as Alexandra said, such an interesting model for the future. What can happen, what will happen, potentially to many cities around the world. And we can see when we're there, we can explore some of the ways that that Venice is resisting sea level rise and resisting this this urge to be categorized as an endless series of disasters. So I think one of the really interesting things for me in terms of my historical studies is just examining how you would build a healthy city in a swamp. We know most cities are coastal. We know a vast majority of them, of big cities around the world, are built as ports, and that means typically they're subject to sea level rise. And so what happens when you try and build a city in a swamp? Well, as I said, you have this incredible lagoon with a sort of loosely structured series of islands which are partly tidal, flooded at high tide. There's not much tide in the Mediterranean, but there is a bit in the Adriatic, and certainly the sea level rises and falls and creates this tidal lagoon. As we'll see when we visit some of the islands less visited by tourists, there are areas where the regeneration of the swamp is being encouraged, because the historical area of coverage of the lagoon by swamp was vastly greater than it is today. And you'll see that the swamp is actually an area that's absolute haven to wildlife and full of sort of living creatures and interesting species. And when you see it up close, it's a really fascinating place, and not as you might imagine, just a sea of mud. And there are over 100 islands in the lagoon. It's a living place. So it's still exploited for fishing. You'll see people out enjoying themselves well outside and getting away from the sort of tourist throng centre. That's been one of the joys, I think, of visiting it over these years, is discovering some of these places that are part of Venice and yet really outside one's own experience of Venice. The city seen across the lagoon is really quite an interesting sight. And I want to talk about what it means to build a city in a swamp historically. And in particular, I think in terms of health in Venice, the Black Death was arrived in the 14th century, sometimes known as the calamitous 14th century. Arrived from the Far East, I think, or carried by rats on ships. And Venice is a place where quarantine was invented as a way of separating arriving vessels on the Lazaretto Nuovo in 1468. Spanish ambassador was in 1575 as an important visiting dignitary, not subject to quarantine, and imported the Black Death again. 1577, the plague was over, and you can see these various episodes of plague are so important in historical understanding of health and climate and architecture, and also prompting the construction of some really magnificent sort of memorials in the form of the churches, and of course the cemetery island itself. So I think if you think of people who are at the peak of their trading empire and they're building and living in a swamp, the architectural response to that is really incredible and pervasive, and really, I think one of the things that you will learn living in the city for nearly 2 weeks is it's just how ubiquitous this system of construction is, from the bigger buildings like this, Cardoro, 1428, to much smaller ones, and because people believed that the plague was carried through the air, they set out to build buildings which were very well ventilated, and typically through a T-shaped space in the earlier buildings like this. As you can see in blue, that's the covered areas. The sort of mustard color is open courtyard, and designed to create an airflow through. And you see that all over the place with these open column screens that are such a feature of Venetian architecture at any period, but particularly beautifully expressed in the Gothic period that was so influential. Even in the lower floors, you have these sort of very interesting spaces, which were, of course, because always historically subject to flooding, or at least damp, never really occupied, and become a sort of entry level where you might store a boat or something, but certainly nothing that was perishable. And if we look at the bigger and later palaces, this is one from 1594, sort of high Mannerist period. You can see the same form modified by its now classical exterior appearance, but still with these enormous ventilation spaces through the middle, opening into courtyards at various places. And I think, one of the really nice things about the Biennale as the time to be there is that so many of these buildings are open with impromptu exhibitions, whether they're commandeered as a country exhibition, or whether they are actually part of the official Biennale. But you can actually get into so many of these buildings and see them. And so, as you travel around, somebody seems to be drawing on the screen. I'm not quite sure why. You'll see these building facades which reveal the layout of the building inside all around the place. But I think one of the other things that we have really explored in the past summer schools is how Venice itself has a productive urban fringe, which is really a really exciting and a rediscovery through the slow food movement of Venice's historic market gardens, hortelainages, I think in the French word, which are on the islands surrounding Venice, and which today provide a lot of the high value added food production for the city itself. And we'll be visiting these and hearing from the people who are growing organic food for supplying directly to Venice by boat. On Sant'Erasmo, very impressive, and I think really understanding how a city of such size can support itself in such an environment was a real discovery for me, speaking personally. And we would be having Professor Susan Parham along, who's written extensively on food and its relationship to urban form, production, consumption, distribution, and so on. And you find produce from Sant'Erasmo in the market stalls, which are even today all through central Venice. Once you get off the main tourist run, you'll find little markets where you can buy, and if you're staying in self-catering accommodation, you can cook it yourself in the evening. And certainly on the menu, occasionally you'll find the little clams from the lagoon on the menu. So in closing, I just want to talk about the idea of Venice, because I think it's fair to say that as we saw from Mid-Journey, everybody has an idea of Venice. And I think it's been incredibly pervasive through history. First, in the sort of interventions that were made in Venice in various historical periods, late 19th century, Venice rebuilding itself in its own manner, in a more systematic way. In places around Venice, you find these echoes of Venetian architecture everywhere that you go, in more or less sophisticated sort of forms. Some of them over on the Lido, a place that's well worth exploring, have these fantastic interpretations of Venice from the late 19th century. And so on around the place, a sort of very artistic, very free, kind of picturesque, if you like, 19th century interventions. But even during the 20th century, as Venice rebuilt, you'll find buildings from the 1930s here, which are deliberately styled in a Venetian way, even though the detailing is a very stripped back 1930s sort of classicism. And these buildings are designed to fit in wherever they are. This is post-war reconstruction of Venice, a sort of much more systematized Venetian architecture, but still recognizably Venice right into the late 20th century, with University Ca' Foscarini on the Zattere. You find little bits of detail from Venice pervading this. And I think it brought to life the idea for me of building culture that is utterly permeated through a society and a culture, and in which every building is some sort of expression of its essential qualities right up to the present day. And so even some of these very much later buildings are constructed in a way self-consciously to emulate Venice and to fit in. I think even Paolo Luigi Nervi, building in Venice, was obliged to try and be Venetian in the late 20th century. But I think what's interesting beyond that is just how the image of Venice has been transported around the world, and how when you leave, you will be carrying with you memories and images of Venice. And I fancy that they might influence your future work as architects or however you work. So in my hometown in Adelaide, South Australia, I was always struck by this 19th century essay in Venetian Gothic, I think probably taken from a book. And I think visiting Venice was as common 150 years ago, but it certainly influenced what people built. Venice Beach in California, again, these ideas of Venice that have been taken beyond the lagoon and out into the world. Perhaps a little bit hard to see in some of these images, but this is again a Venice in Las Vegas, really quite a good simulacrum of Venice, complete with gondolas and blue water. And the Venetian Hotel with its sort of miniature Piazza San Marco, and so on. You find there are Venices everywhere now. The Venice in Indonesia, here's some detail of that one in Indonesia. And even places that are simply called Venice because they have a lot of canals. Venice of the North, for example, Amsterdam, Little Venice in London, really nothing much there to look or remind us of Venice apart from water. Little Venice in Colmar, and so on. And so we find these Venices which are imaginaries or images or simulacra of Venice all around the world. And I think that shows you the enduring image of Venice, and one that we hope you'll take away. And finally, in the last few years, we've been asking students to look at Tronchetto, which is this artificial island constructed in the 1960s for car parking, and how that might be reimagined. It's a pretty dismal place that doesn't speak much of Venice when you go there, but the students in past years have come up with some amazing transformations. And I think it's fair to say, in closing, that Tronchetto was once the Venice of the future. It was an attempt to bring the motor car into Venice. And I think, if there's one lesson we've learned, is we probably, as a society, have put too much into personal independent transportation, and we need to think collectively, and we need to think in terms of low energy and in terms of active travel, because of countering so many of the health problems that we face today, which can be addressed by promoting active travel. So that's it, and I'll give the floor back to Alexandra. Oops, how do I stop share? There. Good, thank you.
Thank you both so much. This was very insightful. Guys, I hope that we have 63 people now online. I hope that you could feel the energy, the depth that the studio has. And it's a very special course. It's very rigorous academically, but it's also hands-on because of the Tronchetto project. We actually have now some time for Q&As. I encourage you to share your questions in the chat. I see that I already have 7 messages. Let me see. I'll go through the questions. But while people are still typing, I actually have one question. So the Tronchetto project, what was with the project that students actually came up? What was, you know, the most surprising for you or the most interesting?
That's a really interesting question, Alexandria. I think over the years, over the 3 years we've run it, the students have come to see Tronchetto as offering a lot of potential. I mean, initially, I must say, I thought of demolishing or removing Tronchetto from the map because it's just sort of, you know, angular and out of place thing. But I think, you know, there are many things that Venice needs, and in some respects, people have seen Tronchetto as like the tabula rasa in which those things can be provided. You know, cheaper housing, more jobs, industry, better connections to the rest of the world. You know, it can actually have a really interesting future, I think, once we get the motor traffic out of it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Another question.
Can I add to that? So also,
Yeah.
very quick, because I think there's been amazingly creative projects that students have projected that haven't just come out of the blue. And some will come sometimes say, we're actually going to recognize that Venice is a tourist center. We're going to make it a, you know, just the tourist zone and just sort of try and do a 21st century version of tourism. And that was quite interesting. The other ones we've noticed, the oysters, for example, around the Venetian lagoons and the canals, and they said, well, actually, we're going to make this like an oyster village, an oyster farm, and sort of it's a whole range of very, very interesting observations, and they're getting that from sort of 10 days walking around Venice. And I think so some of the idea of maybe, if I mean, many of our students aren't architects, but just the idea of spending 10 days and then sort of thinking about designing a new space. You get a lot of those 10 days are really important. They've got up some amazingly creative ideas coming through.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but anyway, yeah.
No, it's very interesting. Yes, of course. We have one question regarding the scholarship opportunities. I will answer it a little bit later, but there is one question from Ahmed to, I believe, both David and Matthew. What kind of small-scale architectural interventions that could be leveraged correspondingly with the waterscape features? So it's about the architectural interventions that could be leveraged, done.
Really interesting question, isn't it, Alexandra and David? I think you know, some people have seen Tronchetto as an opportunity that, you know, it's the only bit of Venice which doesn't have canals, and it needs canals. Whereas other people have said, well, hang on a minute, it's one of the few bits of Venice which is well above any predicted sea level rise. So we want to keep Tronchetto dry. But I think it really depends on what you're thinking of, and obviously anywhere in Venice you're surrounded by water, so it's as much a part of daily life as the streets and pavements are in most other cities in the world. And well, that's one of the amazing things to see is just how much of the urban life is carried out on water in Venice, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, innovations have been happening since the city was built on innovation. So
Mm,
driving wooden piles into the swamp to start creating sort of terra firma. Venice is built on innovations. It has to innovate all the time. So it's kind of part and parcel. The Venetian evolution is that small scale interventions, whether it's working out what type of
mm,
wood doesn't rot when you drive it to the swampland, to working out the connectivity of canals, and they've just evolved over time. Um, and just you see innovations all the time. I mean, you see it's happened. Either they've been sort of done in the last 10 years to try
mm,
and take in place, increasing numbers of people, of tourists, or trying to
mm,
adapt to when the railway arrived, how did that change the flow of people around Venice 100 odd years ago? So all those small scale interventions are bit by bit. In many ways, there haven't been major changes. It's been that slight
mm,
small scale developments
mm,
corresponding to events in many ways, or just changing circumstances. So the question, I guess, is how do you look into the future and guess what interventions you will be making, intervention you'll make for the future of Venice? Um, and
Yes,
that,
and
yeah,
oh,
sorry,
sorry.
yeah. No, no, over to you, over to you.
I also think that if you haven't been in Venice and you come for the first time, you're really surprised how much of daily services and activities are done on the boats via water. The boats, ambulances are boats. Funeral processions are done on the water by boats. Fire brigades, everything, and that also creates a very special way to live because there are no cars in Venice. Everyone is walking the same streets, so it doesn't matter whether you are super rich and you arrived on a private jet to Marco Polo
mm,
airport, or you're a student staying in a hostel. You're all walking on the same streets. So it is, because it's an island, it's small and it doesn't have any cars. It gives it also kind of intimacy and a different type of
mm,
interactions for both people who are coming, for the visitors, and
mm.
people who live there.
I think that's really one of the most compelling memories that I take away from Venice every year is just how quiet it is. What you hear is footsteps and people talking. There's no cars. I mean, well, obviously there are motorboats on the canals, but you're not walking on the canals. You're often in back streets that are you could hear a pin drop. It's really an extraordinary place that shows what a city built around walking, which is pretty much how we know we need to build our cities for the future, would be like.
Yeah. Another question, how will be the activities in the surrounding farms be held? So when we're going to San Erasmo, so
Mm.
how does the day, I think that's the question. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, in the past we've been taking the boat to Santa Erasmo. It takes about half an hour to get there. We've sometimes combined it with a visit to the Lazzaretto Nuovo, the remains of the former quarantine station. There's no public transport on the island, so we have to walk to the organic farm where a very kind lady has shown us some really fascinating elements of organic agriculture and how they're working with nature rather than against it, and using natural organisms to control pests and so on, and how their distribution system works by boat, often packing up vegetables, putting them on a boat and taking them straight to someone's door in the city, a couple of miles away, and then we finish up at a very secret beach which Venetians go to, and which we won't find on any tourist maps has a very nice little cafe looking over a bit of sea that you won't normally see.
Yeah.
And also, you can get a ticket for the week. So often what students do, we do quite a lot of traveling on the boat. So sometimes it makes sense to get a weekly boat pass, and that does encourage people to explore on their own initiatives.
Yeah.
So we found that although we have a busy day lined up, we always, there's a lot of other activities that students will do, in mini groups, etc. And so when you have the ticket for the
Vaporetto.
Vaporetto, that trip to San Erasmo wakens up all the opportunities that you can do while in Venice. So
yeah. Alexandra, there's some questions about scholarships, and I think the answer is yes, there are scholarships available. Although the main scholarship has been allocated this year, I think.
Yes, so I also see, so talking about scholarships, first of all, I see a question from Marcella Sabato, and she is the winner of this year's scholarship. Every year we run a scholarship in Sustainable Urbanism, where you could apply to join the course, and ECA covers the tuition fee. The deadline for applications has passed, and my team and of course David and Matthew have reviewed the applications and selected the winner. We still have a small scholarship fund available, but it's very small, so it's not going to be a full scholarship, but only partial. If you are interested in that, you please just apply on the website, submit your CV and your motivation letter, and mention that you also would like to apply for the scholarship. And then me and my team, we will review it. It would help if you add your portfolio or link to your portfolio to your application. And also, if you would like to have a scholarship, I encourage you to apply as early as possible. Another question, which is the daily timeline of the course during the period of those 2 weeks? Can I answer that? It's just a schedule.
Please,
question. Yeah. So we usually start our classes around 10, and we are done at around 4, 5 in the afternoon. And the day is usually a combination of lectures, indoor lectures or workshops, and visits to museums, the location that you would be working on, Tronchetto, or visits to the lagoon, like visits to San Erasmo Island. So we try to combine in one day some classroom time and then the visits.
Because
sorry, go on.
Go, David.
There's one question about, is there reading in advance? And we do send out reading in advance, but I think just linking it to the schedule, we deliberately arrange it so that you have sufficient face-to-face time, together and with those delivering the course. But it's also key to have that own independent exploration and study. So your Tronchetto master plan is part. We will go with you and walk you around Tronchetto, but it's also going to other places to explore. So we deliberately haven't filled up every hour of the day with stuff, because one of the aspects that we really are keen on is that independent study, and it relates to the reading. We will send you in advance suggested readings. Each of the sessions will have one suggested sort of academic text to read through that will be open access. But in advance, just exploring yourself. I mean, there's so much open access research available. Many brilliant films and documentaries about Venice, especially over the last few years, particularly vis-a-vis the climate crisis. So for those of you who are keen to get involved and get engaged now, then there's a lot of very good material available, and you'll get more specific guidance nearer the time in terms of set readings and some key textbooks. And we also encourage you to think creatively. So there's a couple of books there that we recommended. There are sort of novels or sort of fictional accounts of Venice, but they provide some elements of the heart or the creative aspect of Venetian living.
We will send a follow-up email, and I'm happy to share some reference materials in that email with you guys. I also would like to mention that we organize social activities outside the class hours. So we would have, some aperitivo, which is typical Venetian drinks, or we'd have a film night. So that's also part of the program. And ECA, the Academy, of course, studies all the exhibitions and projects that are on show in Venice during the time when you are there. And at the beginning of the course, we organize a WhatsApp group for communication, and we share all this information in the WhatsApp group. So then maybe, if you are interested, you can indeed get some friends and from the group and visit those locations. Today I've heard that Jeff Bezos is going to have his wedding during our time,
Oh gosh.
our course in Venice. So I can imagine there would be some logistical restrictions. So these times happen, but we run the courses during the film festival, during the open of the Biennale, during the Carnevale, so we know how to work around it.
Yeah, Nicholas, your question about accommodation, I think one of the great things about Venice is there's so much accommodation there, really. More tourist beds than there are residents by quite a lot. And they range in all sorts of prices, from
Yes.
student hostels right up to the sort of most luxurious hotels you can possibly imagine and beyond. So I think, and then of course there's always Mestre, which is 10 minutes by train across the lagoon. So there's really a lot, and Lido also, another place with a lot of accommodation, and the end of June, beginning of July isn't really the high tourist season, so it's actually not as crowded as it is in August, for example. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, but don't leave it too late.
Yes, and I just shared the link on ECA FAQ section. You have a list of suggested accommodations. That's one thing, and the second thing, once you've registered and paid the tuition fee, you get an invitation to a private Facebook group only for the participants of the ECA programs this summer. And there is a post dedicated specifically to the Sustainable Healthy Cities program. And in the comments, if you are looking for someone to share their accommodation, you can arrange that in that group. So if you are on time, I don't think that it would be a problem to find a affordable accommodation in a good location. All right.
Jonah, yes, I didn't forget your question about how can you convince your employer. Gosh, that's really going to depend, I think, on how convincing an argument you can make in support of further education and further learning and experience. And I think it certainly, I'm sure you can make a good argument that the course counts as CPD, which is usually compulsory for any professional people. And if necessary, I'm sure we can issue a certificate that will convince your employer that it's continuing professional development to attend the course. But good luck with the convincing. It sounds as if they have a budget. In my experience, those budgets are not usually spent, so you're probably in with a chance. And good luck.
We actually have one participant, Giselle from Brazil. I don't know if she's at the webinar. Please raise your hand if you are here. And she works for an architecture firm in Brazil, and her employer pays for her tuition. And what they asked for is a recommendation letter from the academy. And we did that recommendation letter for her. So she presented it to her employer, and that worked out very well. So Jenna, if you would like us to do it, please contact us at study@eca.art, and we are happy to provide you with such letter. There is a question from a person based in UAE about the extreme heat
Hmm.
And how can we handle that?
That's a really interesting question, Abbas, and that's basically where my PhD studies were looking at traditional responses to extreme heat. And Venice is not 50 degrees, but it can get up towards the high 30s, and with very heavy humidity, like the cities in the Gulf. So, it may have some lessons, but I think in broader terms, I think, if you look at some of the traditional buildings in the Gulf, I know they have some absolutely beautiful systems of ventilation, including wind towers and those sorts of things, which were designed to help them to help the inhabitants cope with the extreme climate. But yeah, it's a really good question.
If you're interested in the program, I see some comments that people are interested in the program. In the chat, I've shared the link to the course page where you can apply. Let me just quickly share the, just a second, I'm gonna share the presentation to show, because there are questions, how do I apply? Oh, just a second, sorry. I'll find the right slide. So on the course page, you'll scroll down and you see the application form. We would like to have a letter from you, motivation letter, and your CV, and then you click apply. And we usually review the applications within 7 days. So this is relatively straightforward. Yes. All right. Sux in the conference. Yes.
There was somebody who wanted to ask their question on camera earlier.
That was
Yeah.
Maria.
Marina,
But
yes.
but she asked it.
Oh, okay, in the chat.
Asked it
Brilliant.
already in
Yeah.
the chat. All right. About the apply for the visa. Yes, we do provide visa invitations for the Italian consulate. I believe, Liang, we've sent you already your invitation. Liang gonna join us this summer in Venice. Once you're registered, we ask for your passport details, your address, and other personal details, and then we send you an invitation that you can submit to the Italian consulate. We cannot guarantee that these would be issued, but so far all the applicants received their visas. You only need a short-term tourist Schengen visa to join the course. You do not need a study visa. How is the screening process for the application? So we usually review your portfolio and CV. If we see that you don't have relevant experience, then we review the motivation letter, and we try to see whether you would be a good fit for the course. Okay. All right. How about if I belong to? If you study in, Carol, thank you. Just a second. So, Felix, how about if you're a university student, Felix? You mean you're a university student? That's also fine. Again, we do get around 30% of students in the course. So both graduates and undergraduates, usually more graduate students. So it's no problem at all. It is helpful if in your CV or portfolio you share your some of the projects that you've done in the university. All right, we have Marina and Carol. They're both registered, so they're going to join us in Venice this summer. Oh, and Matthew, David, do you think that if you're studying in development of cities and communities, this course would be relevant?
Yeah, I think, in general, I think any course that studies a city in depth like this is going to be useful and relevant. I suspect that's really depends on what you make of it. And, as David has said, really I think the course provides you an opportunity to have 2 weeks thinking about a particular problem and looking at its historical background and about the culture that produced it and its contemporary problems. And that seems like, to me anyway, a good opportunity to think about development of cities and communities and come up with some interesting hypotheses for the future. So yes, I think in a nutshell, perhaps not in terms of learning outcomes, but I think it's what you bring to the courses and what the other participants bring and what you share in the classroom is really a part of the learning as much as the formal lectures and visits.
Yes, indeed. Okay, all right. So then I would like to thank everyone for attending. As a little appreciation for the attendance of the webinar, in the follow-up email, we will offer a 100% €100 off the tuition fee. We'll share a promo code that you could use on the website once you've been accepted to the course. You will also receive the recording of this webinar. And if you have any questions, me and my team are available for any requests or any information that you might need. You can contact us at study@eca.art. There is also a contact form on the website and a WhatsApp or telephone number if you would like to reach us by phone. I would like to thank you, David and Matthew, for their time. Do we have time for one more question? What do you think?
Yeah, I do. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we do, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, of
Then
course.
we'll answer one more question from Lucia, and we wrap up. So, is sustainable architecture research a topic of the summer school? Like, how can we study specific subjects in the field in our future career?
David.
Well, the whole idea is looking at taking a case study of Venice, but looking at a wider aspect of sustainable, healthy cities. So I think that probably constitutes a large portion of sustainable architecture. And I think all the question is then related to research experiments. Well, in some ways, you can see your own getting the information, the evidence to consider. Drongetto is in many ways a research experiment, but you can't, it's the idea of learning best current practice, thinking about future practice, and a lot of the discussion is looking into the future and looking at scenarios. So we will not be doing urban experiments, but one of the fundamental aspects of sustainable urbanism is that all forms of urbanism are experiments. No one really knows the exact outcome of any traffic control or building type, etc. All you can do is say, well, actually, this worked okay the first time we did it, let's do it again. So all forms of architecture, urbanization are experimentation. To that extent, yes, I think it does fit very much into sustainable architecture, and you'll have a chance to think about the future directions.
And David, I think it's fair to say that you and I did not pre-coordinate on jumper colour today, but it's just a happy accident. But to sum up that, yes, I think in terms of cities, we start cities, we don't finish them, so they're always an experiment, an ongoing experiment. And Venice is an ongoing experiment, really.
Yeah. All right. Great. Then I'll be using Venice. I will be using Venice as a reference to my city. It is formed by canals as well. Marina, I believe you're from you're from Latin America, right? You're from Brazil, I believe. Yeah. We had a chat with Marina. Yes, Brazil. Fantastic. Fantastic. So I think this year, this summer is going to be a wonderful international group again. Just one comment to Felix. If you share your email, I'm happy to share all the information on how to join the course. Yes, thank you. All right. Me or Sophia, a program coordinator from ECA, she's in my team. She will contact you by email. All right. So, guys, the registration is open. We'll follow up with an email with the application link, date, fees, and how to reach out if you have any questions. Me and my team are here to support you. I encourage you to apply, and it's a wonderful program. And I do think that it will bring a lot of value in your career, in your future projects, research. Thank you again for joining us, David, Matthew. Always a pleasure. And we truly hope to see you in Venice this June.
Great. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to attend, and I hope to see you and meet you in Venice and share some interesting discussions.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Bye bye. Have a good day.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.